Competitive Zero Build. What was once a thriving sector of the Fortnite community now sits at its lowest point ever. From day one of its release in March of 2022, people said it was not only the future of Fortnite, but Fortnite competitive as well. However, just over 2 years later and the mode is at its lowest point of all time, aimbotters and hackers run rampant in almost every tournament lobby at a rate far higher than that of the standard builds mode. Teaming, and solos especially, is also a frequent occurrence in Zero Build. And just a few days ago with the release of Chapter 5 Season 4, the nail in the coffin for Fortnite Zero Build has just been dropped. But what happened for a mode with so much excitement behind it to fade into obscurity in just 2 years? Well, to answer that, we need to look at the origins of Zero Build. Picture this. It is early 2022 and Chapter 3 Season 1 is about to end. Fortnite is at one of its lowest points in history with its community in disarray. The competitive side of the player base is fed up with the SMG spray meta that reigned supreme for the entire season, while the casual player base are quitting in droves due to the extreme skill gap created by the building mechanic. Seeing this, Epic decides to pull an ace out of their sleeve. On the release of the next season, Epic just removed building in all non-competitive modes for the first week. On paper, this was a horrendously bad idea and even casuals agreed. But once everyone got around to playing it, they realized that it was not only fun, but somehow better than builds. Immediately, almost everything about the new season was overshadowed by the removal of building. Once the week-long playtest was over, Epic would add a separate playlist for Zero Builds after seeing how popular it was. Epic's gamble had paid off, and once again, Fortnite was back in the eyes of many. Not only did many casual players who quit come back, but streamers who had long since quit did as well. Many of the iconic faces of Fortnite competitive that quit, such as Tfue and Aiden, would return and begin grinding Zero Builds, and this would ultimately cause the birth of Zero Build competitive. Just a few weeks after the new season launched, Twitch would host their own Zero Build tournament, which was a massive success. Tfue would then follow, hosting a variety of his own Zero Build tournaments. Seeing the success of these third-party tournaments, Epic would begin hosting official Zero Build tournaments too, which was also a massive success. Zero Build tournaments seemed to have everything Fortnite was missing: massive streamers playing, easy to understand gameplay, and constant action. Even the top build mode pros of the game would participate as well, and with arena modes for Zero Build being released in July of 2022, the question of a potential Zero Build FNCS loomed across the community. However, this is where the first faults of Zero Build began to show. The idea of making Zero Build a staple competitive mode did not seem to go over well with the current competitive player base for a variety of reasons. The debate of whether or not Zero Build should be made competitive would go on for the next few months. In the meantime though, Zero Build competitive continued on. Every season now had separate cash cups designated for Zero Build. Many creators that were given official tournaments to host, such as Cypher PK, would host them in Zero Build exclusively. And many of Fortnite's third-party tournament organizers such as Gamers8, ESL, and DreamHack would all host huge Zero Build LAN tournaments. However, the removal of Zero Build Arena in conjunction with the player experience in open Zero Build tournaments would begin to spell the first signs of the downfall of competitive Zero Builds. While smaller scale tournaments such as Cash Cups and Skin Cups would continue to be hosted on the Zero Build mode, the removal of Zero Build Arena brought into question the legitimacy of Zero Build as a whole. The tournaments were popular, so why was an FNCS never made for it? Well, this comes down to two primary reasons. The first being that the core game was never designed with Zero Builds in mind. You see, most Battle Royale games and PvP shooter games as a whole have much different gunplay than Fortnite. In most other shooter games, the gunplay is the primary form of both combat and skill expression, so it is purposely made very complex but also comprehensive so it can be perfected with enough skill. An example of this would be spray patterns in Counter-Strike. All weapons in Counter-Strike have designated spray patterns that remain constant, and it is up to the player to learn the precise movements to be able to control them. Other games incorporate mechanics such as recoil, bullet drop-off, and damage ramp-up in order to complexify gunplay. However, Fortnite's gunplay was and still is extremely simplistic in comparison. Prior to Chapter 5, every weapon was hit scan with randomized bloom, meaning there was almost no skill in the gunplay. Just point and spray at an opponent and hope your bullets hit. The building feature helped to counteract this though, as very rarely did fights ever devolve into spray battles. You would spray opponents if you got the jump on them, but that is really it. Once the opponent reacted by placing builds, the fight would become mostly dependent on shotguns, which are much less luck-based than ARs and SMGs. However, without building, shotguns would become almost useless as there was now no longer a safe way to close the gap on enemies. Fights would become extremely dependent on spray weapons, and in a game like Fortnite where spray weapons are extremely simple and luck dependent, it would stifle any opportunity for skill expression. And the red dot weapons didn't make it much better either, as the map wasn't designed for zero builds either. Fortnite's maps are designed with building in mind first and foremost, so high ground positions that would normally be manageable in builds were extremely frustrating to play against in no builds. And Fortnite wasn't just going to create an entirely new map for zero builds, so the mode would struggle. And even with the bullet drop changes introduced in Chapter 5, Fortnite's weapons still had randomized bloom, which was suboptimal for a purely gunplay focused mode. However, this would be the least of the problems for zero build. The next reason zero build competitive began to fail was cheaters and hackers. Now this wasn't an issue in closed off invite only tournaments such as the Gamers 8 LAN and Twitch Rivals. So many never considered the potential to cheat the system in zero builds at that time. But once open tournaments with prizing began to run for zero builds, all hell broke loose. Now Fortnite has had a pretty big cheating problem for the past few years, but the extent of it was seen tenfold in zero builds. Because you couldn't build, there was no way to stop somebody with aimbot from just beaming the entire lobby, whereas in build modes, the cover provided by building meant that hackers were more vulnerable to other players who could outplay them. Teaming was also a huge issue in zero build tournaments as well. In order to perform well in Fortnite tournaments, you need to place well in your individual games. This would lead to players in no build tournaments abusing things such as vehicles and shields in order to avoid fights. And when games got to the point where Storm made it too difficult to avoid other players, people would just hop in cars with other players as it was more advantageous to just team with them as opposed to risk dying in a fight. This, along with the rampant aimbotter problem, gave zero builds a poor reputation in the community. Zero build tournaments were seen as a joke to the wider competitive audience, and with the recent launch of Chapter 5 Season 4, Epic seems to agree with this sentiment, putting the nail in the coffin for zero build competitive. In the Chapter 5 Season 4 competitive blog post, Epic detailed their roadmap for the rest of 2024, and in that, huge cuts of zero build competition were made. Most regions had the number of qualification spots for zero build Cash Cup finals cut in half, while the qualification spots for build mode finals doubled. The message is clear: Epic is taking away prizing from zero build and reinvesting it into builds, and it seems like going forward, zero build will be no more. With the success of the reload mode, Epic is already setting up tournaments for reload. There is no doubt in my mind that within the next year, zero build tournaments will be entirely phased out in favor of expanding build mode and reload tournaments. However, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You see, zero build was never meant to be competitive. Competitive zero build is a paradox by its very nature. The mode was originally intended to give casual players a much easier playlist and less sweaty gameplay experience. Trying to force competitive onto something that is not inherently competitive never works. Just look at Team Fortress 2. The 2016 Meet Your Match update that attempted to modernize the game nearly killed it. So in conclusion, zero build competitive is officially dead, but that is not a bad thing. This will only help Fortnite in the long run, as zero builds can now be the premier casual game mode with all the crazy items, while build mode can stay the premier competitive mode where skill matters the most. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see similar content, then like, subscribe, follow my socials, and check out the video on your screen right now.